Welcome to the mobility segment of the Performance Fit Wellness video series. My name's Danielle. I'm a physical therapist at Performance Physical Therapy. So today we're going to start in a hands and knees or quadruped position doing some joint mobility. So wherever you are in your space, you're just going to come down onto hands and knees. And we're starting off with some controlled articular rotations or CARs. So your starting position, you want your back to be in a nice neutral spine, and we're doing some shoulder rotations. So you're lifting one arm, thumb is facing forward, rotating so the thumb faces behind, and you're sweeping that arm right alongside your body. And we're going for 4 rotations before we switch directions. So we're going from front to back, and remember your palm is rotating out as you come behind, and then we're going to switch directions for 4 rotations. Again, you're keeping your back nice and flat. All that's moving is that shoulder, and it's a real controlled, slow movement. So to switch sides, whatever side was on the ground, now we're doing those controlled articular rotations or CARs. So 4 going back, and then switch directions. 4 coming and really reaching through the fingertips as you move around that range of motion. Really getting into the shoulders. All right, now we're moving on to the hips. So you're gonna start by bringing your knee forward towards the elbow, rotating out and behind, and then the knee coming to the ground again. So again, we're rotating through these ball and socket joints of the shoulders and the hips just to get in to those ranges of motion as we warm up. And then you'll switch directions so the knee comes behind, rotates out, and then forward towards that elbow before coming back underneath the body. Keeping the spine and the pelvis in a neutral position. I'm gonna switch sides so you can see, but you guys are gonna just switch whichever knee is moving, forward to the elbow, out to the side, knee points down, and return to the starting position. So again, we're doing 4 of each direction, nice and slow. Don't get too far ahead of me. This is just for mobility, not for speed. And switching sides, so we're gonna bring the knee behind and then around and forward to that elbow before bringing it back underneath the body. Should be on your 3rd repetition. And our last one, nice big circle, and come back into our starting position. So our next exercise is a cat camel. So we're thinking about moving the joints of the spine. So you're bringing your tailbone and your head up towards the sky, creating an arch in the back, and then rounding so that the crown of the head comes down and the tailbone comes down to face the ground, creating an arch in the spine. And then we're gonna alternate between these 2 movements into spinal extension and rounding into spinal flexion. So this is really gonna help you prepare for any activities that involve, bending forward, reaching up, even a little bit of rotation. Getting into the segments of the back helps with these. We're gonna go for 10 more repetitions. And again, nice and slow and controlled. You can think about where you're getting this movement from, whether it's the crown of the head, the tailbone, or the motion at the belly button, dropping down towards the ground, and then tucking in towards the spine. Got a couple more. And make sure you're breathing throughout this range of motion as well. All right, so coming back to our neutral position, we're gonna get into some more rotation movements and movements with lengthening our muscles. So we're coming into a pike position or a downward facing dog. You should feel this in your hamstrings. So your hips are up towards the ceiling, your back is flat. And then you're just gonna come back into a plank position. So we're kind of rocking our hips up and back, keeping the shoulders and the knees straight, and again, keeping the back straight. So really the only thing that you're moving is your hips and your shoulders. That's where the motion is coming from for this pike or downward dog. Starting to become a little more active because you're supporting your body, using your shoulders, using your core, starting to build some heat. So even though this is a mobility workout, it's still active. You know, you're not sitting and stretching a muscle statically. You're getting a nice range of motion through the whole body. We're gonna go for 2 more. And up next, we've got what I call the world's greatest stretch. So we'll start from a side angle. You're gonna bring one leg forward, the opposite hand is down, okay? Once you're here, you can decide if you wanna keep the knee down for a little bit more support, or you can keep the knee up. That will increase the hip flexor stretch on whatever leg is back. From this point, you're gonna take the arm of the knee that's forward, reach under the opposite arm, and then open up and rotate. So now we're getting a hip flexor stretch, a glute stretch, we're getting spinal rotation, all in one stretch. That's why I call it the world's greatest stretch. We get a nice bit of opening through that top shoulder as well. So you're just gonna flow through that motion. Again, just from the front, whatever leg is forward, the opposite arm is down. You're reaching under the opposite arm and opening up to rotate the body. If you haven't already, go ahead and switch sides. We're just moving slowly through these motions. And again, option to keep that back knee up or down. And you can stay at the end of one position, but overall we want to keep it pretty dynamic, because most of what we do throughout the day hopefully is move. If we find ourselves too static, a lot of times we run into issues. So I like to keep this active mobility approach. All right, next up, we're gonna do a squat to stand. So as deep as you can, you're gonna kind of bring your hips towards the ground as you're squatting. So you want your feet a little bit wider than your hips and your toes pointing slightly out. You can use your elbows against your knees to create some stability through your trunk, and your chest should be high. If you're leaning really far forward, then you need to come out of that position or maybe get something under your hips to support you. So from here, you're getting a nice stretch in the hips, a nice opening. You're gonna bring one hand down to the ground, open up the opposite hand and rotate to get some spinal rotation. Bring that hand back to the opposite knee and you're gonna switch. So you're rotating the other hand up skyward, coming down, hands to center, and now we're gonna get into the hamstrings. So your hands come down to the ground, hips are high, cup back down in that squat. You're gonna raise your arms overhead, and then now we're activating those muscles to stand. So that is a squat to stand flow. So now we're gonna do that 2 more times. So we're down in that deep squat, hand to the ground, opposite hand skyward. Get a nice rotation, switch sides. Hands to the ground, hips up for a hamstring stretch. Make sure that those hips are going back, your weights in your heels. Coming back down to your starting position and actively coming up into a standing position. 1 more round. This one, take at your own pace. Again, all about controlled movement. And finishing up with that active standing position. Now that we're here in a standing position, we're gonna finish with some good mornings. So this is a basic hip hinge movement. So anytime you're trying to lengthen your hamstrings, a lot of people have tight hamstrings, doing some active movements can also help with that lengthening, some eccentrics. So you wanna keep your feet about hips width distance. You're just hinging so your hips come back and your chest comes forward, but you're keeping your chest high. I like to keep my hands on my hips just for a little bit of feedback. At this point, you should feel some stretch in your hamstrings and you're actively engaging your glutes to come up. So again, we're just gonna do this slow and controlled eccentric motion. That's the lowering down phase to get that stretch. And then we're coming up, actively using those muscles that helped us to lower down. And we're gonna go for 10. This is number 4. And now you can start really feeling how you have more mobility because of all the movement preparation we did in through the hips and the spine, but we're still able to achieve that stretch in the hamstrings. We got 3 more. Last one. Little pause at the bottom, feel that stretch. All right, and we should be moving pretty good. All right, so we're moving into a mobility complex now. So this is combining a bunch of movements into kind of a flow or a series. So we're gonna start in a plank position. So option for knees down to start. We will be lifting the knees to come back up into that pike position, just where we were before. You're gonna bend the elbows, bring the chest through your hands, and now we're coming into that extension, which you might remember from our cat camel. From here, back into your plank. Bring one leg forward for that world's greatest stretch. Reaching underneath, opening up. And then place that hand down. We're gonna do the opposite side. Reach the hand underneath, opening up. And then we're gonna come right into a side lunge. So whatever foot was back, you're lunging into that foot. You'll get a nice adductor or inner leg stretch on the opposite side. And then flowing back over that front leg for a hip flexor stretch with a reach. So the knee down is an option. You want to keep your shoulders and your hips in line. You can pop that knee up for a little more of an active stretch. Then you're going to bring the hands down. Whatever foot's in front, bring it behind the opposite wrist. And now we're in a pigeon or a hip, like a piriformis stretch. So you should feel that stretch in the back of whatever knee is bent and that hip. And then we're gonna start it all over again. So, plank position, downward facing dog, bend the elbows, chest comes through the hands. Now bring the opposite leg forward, whichever side you didn't start with, that's the side you wanna do now. Opening up, come back to that plank position, switch sides, world's greatest. And we're gonna come into that side lunge. I'm gonna stay facing the camera, so you guys are lunging towards that front leg and then turning back over for your hip flexor stretch. Arms come down, that front foot is gonna come behind the opposite wrist. Now you're in that pigeon pose for a piriformis stretch. And that's one on each side. Now we're gonna start it again. We've got 2 more. You can kind of pick up the pace as you get comfortable with it. So down to upward dog, that world's greatest, side lunge, hip flexor stretch, pigeon. So now we're becoming more dynamic in our mobility, which means that you have to use your muscles a little bit more. Create some stability. Opposite arm, reach, switching sides, lunging over that back leg for a side lunge, and then returning to the front for that hip flexor stretch, and finishing with your piriformis stretch. So that's a nice flow. We've gotten into the inside of the hips, the outside of the hips. I've got one more flow to make this mobility complex a little more active. So all you're gonna need to do is find a seat on the ground with your feet slightly wider than the hips again. We're gonna start with a movement called the shin box. This gets into your deep hip rotators. You're gonna let both knees fall to one side. What you wanna make sure you're not doing is rounding through your spine to achieve that motion. Keep your spine nice and tall. Stay up on your butt bones. You're not sitting back onto your tailbone. as you achieve this motion. You might need to walk your hands back a little more. That's okay. Leaning forward, you're gonna feel a lot more sensation in that hip. So find whatever position works best for you. And now we're gonna make it dynamic. Now that you kind of have the motion in the position, we're gonna go back and forth. You're really gonna feel it on whatever knee is inside. You're targeting those deep hip rotators. And you may also notice some asymmetries. It's very common. Most people are a little more tight on one side than the other. My left side tends to be a little tighter. But this is why we kind of go through these things to access our range of motion on a regular basis, especially if you train a lot. You know, we need to make our training pretty diverse. So from here, like I said, we're gonna create an active component. So you're gonna start with that shin box position on one side. I'd like you to try bringing your hands off the ground if you can, so that you're going to come up with your hips. So your legs are creating your base of support. Your hips are going to leave the ground as you lean forward and use your glutes to stabilize you here. From here, whatever leg is back, you're bringing that leg forward into a half kneeling position. You can prop yourself up on that back toe, and then we're coming up to stand. And then we're gonna reverse it. So you come into a reverse lunge. You wanna kind of tip that toe towards the side. Bring your leg behind, but don't fall into that position. Try to control your hips, and then slowly we're lowering down into that shin box. And now you've returned to the starting position. So it's a lot of steps. We're gonna try it a few times on each side. You can switch sides now. Again, this is our starting position. Try to get your spine tall. You're actively coming up onto the shins. And from here, you can bring your leg forward, support yourself on the toe, and actively come to stand. So this is all about nice motor control. Bringing the toe in. That other leg comes back, but we're not falling down onto the hip, and slowly lowering yourself down to then return to the start. Two more, we're gonna do one on each side. This is a tough one, so if you don't get it on the first try, stick with it. Really practice that fundamental shin box motion, and that's going to kind of improve your mobility and that foundation for this flow. And this is one that you would probably do at the end of your mobility routine when you're already pretty warmed up into your hips, into the spine, and you've gotten some muscle activation going. And last one, we're returning to that starting position. You might even be working up a little sweat. I mean, I'm sweating, and this is just a mobility routine, so if you guys are sweating too, you're not the only ones. So that's our mobility segment for the Performance Fit and Wellness series. Thanks for joining us. I hope you enjoyed it.